The orbital station floated in the silence of deep space, far from the crowded lanes of the core worlds, its long metal arms reaching out to receive ships from distant systems. The place was a busy port for traders, mercenaries, and wanderers from across the galaxy, and the cargo bays never seemed to sleep in the midst of the noise and movement. Evan worked without much thought, his hands carrying crates, his mind following the same routine he had followed for years. He was not an officer or a fighter or a man with power. He was simply a cargo technician who kept the station running one shipment at a time. He had seen many faces in his work, some human, some alien, and most of them passed through without leaving any trace in his memory. On this day, however, when a freighter from the rim worlds docked, something different caught his eye. Amid the group of passengers and laborers stepping down from the ship, there was a figure who did not seem to belong. She was small and thin, her skin a pale shade that almost blended with the station lights. Her clothes were worn and mismatched, as if she had been traveling for too long without the means to replace them. Her head was lowered, and she avoided every gaze that turned her way. Evan noticed that others paid little attention to her. Some workers nearby laughed quietly and muttered about stowaways who hid on ships and hoped to disappear into the crowds of busy ports. The way they spoke of her made it sound as if she were nothing important, just another nameless traveler who would vanish into the outer decks and never be thought of again. He should have ignored her and gone back to unloading the cargo, yet something in her movement made him pause. She carried no bag, no tools, no belongings at all, and there was a strange, careful way she stepped, as if she feared every sound. When the other passengers moved away, she remained near the wall of the bay, not looking up. Evan found himself walking over without knowing exactly why. He told her that she could not stay in the docking area without clearance, and asked if she had somewhere to go. She said nothing, only shook her head in a slow, uncertain way. Her voice, when it finally came, was quiet, almost a whisper, saying she was only passing through and needed a place to rest for a short while. There was something in her tone that made it clear she was asking more than she said. Evan glanced around. The shift supervisor was too busy checking manifests to notice, and the security officers were on the far side of the bay dealing with another dispute. He sighed and motioned for her to follow him. He led her past the main aisles and into the back storage section, where spare crates and unused equipment were stacked high. The smell of machine oil and metal filled the air. He found a spot where a crate covered part of the wall, creating a small sheltered corner. It was hardly comfortable, but it was hidden from most eyes. He handed her a protein bar from his own pocket and told her she could stay here until she figured out her next move. She accepted the food without meeting his gaze and ate in small, careful bites. Evan asked her name, but she did not give one. She only murmured something in a language he did not know, and then switched to another phrase in basic human speech, saying she was grateful for his kindness. Her eyes, when she finally lifted them, were strange, unlike any he had seen before. They were a deep silver, but within the silver ran faint shifting patterns, almost like the reflection of starlight on water. The sight of them made him pause for a moment, as if he were staring into something not quite of this world. The quote of this world. Next hours passed with him returning to his duties, but his mind kept drifting back to the hidden corner and the silent figure resting there. As he moved crates and signed off on delivery slips, he kept wondering what had brought her here, why she was alone, and how she had survived the long journey without so much as a bag of supplies. When his shift ended and most of the crew headed to the mess hall for a meal, he went back to check on her. She was awake now, sitting with her knees drawn up and her gaze fixed on the floor. He asked again if she had anyone waiting for her or any plans. She shook her head, and for the first time there was a flicker of something like fear in her eyes. It was not the fear of a stranger in a new place, but the fear of someone who knew they were being hunted. Evan frowned, wondering if he had made a mistake by bringing her here. Still, he told himself she was just a lost traveler, nothing more. But later that night, when he passed by the corner on his way to the maintenance deck, he saw her stagger and catch herself against a crate. Her body trembled as if she had gone too long without proper food or rest. He stepped forward quickly and caught her before she could fall. Her skin felt cool, and her breathing uneven. He realized she might not even be able to reach the med bay without collapsing. He decided to take her to the station's auto med scanner. The machine could at least tell if she needed urgent treatment. They reached the small side chamber, where the scanner sat humming softly. He helped her sit and activated the device. The scanner swept a light over her and began to process data. For a moment it seemed routine, then the display flashed an alert. Access restricted. Authorization required. Evan stared at the words, confused. The scanner had never refused to identify someone before. It simply locked the results behind a security warning, as if her very existence was a classified matter. He tried to reset it, but the machine gave the same response. The girl's eyes were on him now, watching his reaction. She did not speak, but he could feel the weight of unspoken truth pressing in the air. Evan sat back and stared at the warning on the screen, wondering what kind of traveler could trigger a security lock in a civilian med scanner. He told himself it was none of his business, and yet he felt an odd pull to know more. That night he could not sleep. The image of those shifting silver eyes kept returning to him, along with the unanswered questions. He told himself she was nobody, just someone passing through, and yet a part of him could not accept that. He had worked on this station for years, and seen more than his share of wanderers and runaways, and she was not like any of them. Something about her felt as if it belonged to another story, one he had not yet heard. The next day began like any other on the station, with the sound of docking clamps locking into place, the steady rumble of engines, and the low voices of workers echoing in the bay. Evan forced himself to focus on his tasks, but his thoughts kept drifting to the girl in the hidden corner. He wondered if she had stayed through the night, or if she had slipped away into the endless maze of corridors and decks. When he finally found a moment to check, he saw her still there, sitting quietly, her back resting against the crate. Her posture was calm, but her eyes were alert, moving with quiet awareness. Every time someone passed by in the distance, asked if she had eaten, and handed her another packet from his lunch, she took it with a small nod, but again said little in return. This silence was strange to him. For most people he helped would talk about where they had come from, or where they were headed. She seemed to guard her words carefully, as if each one carried a weight too heavy to give away. Evan began to notice more about her movements. She never stayed in one spot for long when he was not watching. She would shift to a different angle, always keeping some part of herself shielded from open view. She also seemed to understand things quickly without asking, as if she had been in many stations like this before. Later in the day, a group of alien merchants came to the bay, bringing rare goods from a distant sector. As they passed by the corner where she sat, the girl's head lowered sharply, and her shoulders tensed. Evan caught the change immediately. The merchants glanced her way for only a second, but there was something sharp in their gaze, something that made Evan's chest tighten. He waited until they left before asking her quietly if she knew them. She shook her head, but he could see it in her eyes that she was not telling the truth. That evening, Evan returned with a small portable scanner from his own locker, not as advanced as the med bay's system, but still enough to gather basic biological readings. He told himself he was only doing this to make sure she was healthy, but deep down he wanted answers. She allowed the scan without resistance, watching him with those strange silver eyes. The device hummed and processed the data before displaying results in a language code he did not recognize. It was unusual. The scanner normally gave simple, clear readings on any known species. Instead, this time, it showed a partial human genome mixed with unknown sequences, followed by a data tag marked as locked. Evan frowned, trying to think of any reason a portable scanner would refuse to give full information. It reminded him of the med bay's reaction the night before. Two different machines had reacted the same way, which meant this was no simple glitch. Something about her biology was connected to a security protocol he could not access. The thought made him uneasy because he had seen enough To know that when the government classified information at this level, it was never for harmless reasons, he decided to test another suspicion. He switched the scanner to language mode and spoke a few phrases in trade dialects. She understood each one, even those rarely used on this station. This was not normal for someone claiming to be a simple traveler. Knowledge of so many tongues hinted at a background far beyond the life of a runaway or stowaway. Evan asked again where she had come from, and this time she hesitated before saying in a soft voice that she had traveled far from a place she could never return to. When he pressed for more, she looked away and said nothing. That night the station grew quieter, but Evan could not shake the feeling they were being watched. He noticed security officers moving through the bay more often than usual, their eyes scanning the crowd with more intent than normal. It was not the casual sweep they did during routine checks. It felt as if they were searching for someone specific. Evan glanced toward the corner where she sat hidden, but still she kept her head down. When the officers left, he knelt beside her and told her what he had seen. She did not seem surprised. Instead, she told him in a low whisper that there were people who wanted to find her, and if they did, she would never leave this station alive. Evan felt a chill at the calm way she said it, as if this truth had been with her for a long time. He asked why they wanted her, but she shook her head again, as though the words could not yet be spoken. And able to sleep once more, Evan sat in the dim light of the storage bay, thinking about her situation. He had taken in strangers before and offered small kindnesses to those passing through, but this was different. The security alerts, the locked data, the way she carried herself, it all pointed to a story much larger than anything he had been a part of before. He told himself to let it go, that his life was simple and should remain that way, yet the thought of leaving her to be taken by people she clearly feared sat heavy in his chest. In the early hours of the morning, he returned with his handheld DNA tester, a small unit he used for checking plant and food samples in trade shipments. He doubted it would give more than basic markers, but perhaps it could reveal something overlooked by the other scanners. He asked her to give a tiny sample of saliva, which she did without argument. The machine processed it for a few moments before flashing a bright red signal on its small display. The words that appeared made him stare in disbelief. The sample matched a restricted genetic profile known only to the Central Archives and was linked to a protected lineage marked high security level. Evan's heart pounded. He had no idea what this lineage meant, but the machine displayed an identification string far longer than anything he had ever seen. It was as if her DNA was tied to a whole network of history and authority. The device also carried a warning that the test results would be transmitted automatically to Central Command within a standard cycle. He quickly shut it down to prevent the signal from sending, but he could not be sure if he was fast enough. The girl's expression did not change, but there was something in her eyes that told him she already knew what he had just discovered. Before he could ask, she stood and told him in a quiet, steady voice that things would move quickly now, and he would have to decide if he was willing to help her or not. Evan felt the air grow heavier around them. The normal hum of the station seemed distant, replaced by the pounding of his own pulse. He did not know her past or the full truth of what he had uncovered, but he knew one thing. If he stepped back now, she would vanish and her fate would be sealed. If he stepped forward, he might be dragged into something far beyond his understanding. And yet when he met her gaze, there was no hesitation in his choice. Evan had not yet spoken his answer aloud when the distant echo of heavy boots carried through the docking bay. He turned his head and saw the glint of armor in the corridor leading toward the storage area. Station security was moving with purpose, their steps firm and fast, not the slow walk of a routine patrol. They were looking for someone, and Evan had no doubt who that someone was. He motioned for the girl to follow him and moved quickly through the narrow path between stacked crates, keeping his body between her and the approaching officers. They reached a side hatch that led into one of the older maintenance tunnels, a place where workers rarely When except during power checks, the air was warmer here from the heat of the conduits running along the walls. The girl kept pace without a sound, and Evan could feel the tension in every step they took. Once they had put some distance between themselves and the main bay, he stopped and turned to face her, demanding that she tell him what the DNA test had meant. She stood still for a long moment, as if deciding whether the truth would help or harm him. When she finally spoke, her words were steady. She told him she was not just from another world, but from a bloodline that most believed had vanished. Generations ago, her mother had been part of the ruling family of the Interstellar Council, the same family that had shaped the laws and alliances of countless worlds. Her father had been human from the outer colonies. Their union had been forbidden in the eyes of the Council because it blurred the lines of heritage and power. When her parents disappeared years ago, many believed they had died in an accident, but she knew it had been no accident. They had uncovered something dangerous, something the Council wanted buried. Evan felt his stomach tighten. The restricted DNA profile made sense now. If she truly was the last living link to such a bloodline, then her existence alone would threaten the balance of power in the galaxy. Those who held the Council's highest seats would see her as a danger to be erased before she could claim her right to stand among them. He asked why she had not gone to the media or any of the free systems. She said she had tried, but her pursuers had agents everywhere, and anyone who helped her had paid the price. They kept moving deeper into the tunnels, using the dim maintenance lights to guide them. Evan thought about the alert the DNA tester might have sent. Even if he had cut the power quickly, the possibility remained that the signal had reached someone in the upper network. That would explain the sudden sweep by security. It would not be long before the search closed in on them. She told him they needed to leave the station before the next cycle began, and she had a destination in mind. A place where her mother had hidden something important before vanishing. A place she could only reach with help. Evan knew what she was asking was dangerous. The station was not a prison, but every exit was monitored. If the wrong people saw her boarding a ship, she would be taken before they even left dock. Yet as he listened to her voice, there was a quiet strength in her tone, a certainty that this journey mattered not only for her survival, but for something greater. He had no family on the station, no ties strong enough to hold him back. He decided that if he was going to take a risk in his life, this would be the one worth taking. They emerged from the tunnels into the lower engineering deck, where old cargo drones were stored. Most were broken or stripped for parts, but Evan knew there was a hidden service corridor here that led close to the private docking bays used by independent freighters. He guided her through the shadows, keeping an ear out for approaching footsteps. The girl moved with surprising skill for someone who had seemed so fragile when he first saw her. She kept her balance even when they had to cross narrow beams above humming machinery. Halfway through the corridor, they heard voices ahead. Two figures in dark armor stood by the bay entrance, scanning a device the faint glow of its screen reflected. In their helmets, Evan recognized the device as a tracker designed to pick up biosignatures linked to a specific DNA profile. It was proof that the signal from his test had indeed been sent. He felt a wave of guilt, but there was no time to dwell on it. He pulled the girl back into the shadows and waited until the guards moved to check another section of the deck. Once the way was clear, they slipped through the bay and into the narrow access ladder leading to the ship platforms. Here they could see the outline of several freighters, some small and battered, others sleek and clearly expensive. The girl pointed to one of the older cargo ships with faded paint. She said it belonged to a pilot who had once owed her father a debt and might still honor it. The problem was getting aboard without drawing attention. Evan used his station credentials to bypass the lower hatch lock, and they climbed inside before anyone noticed. The ship was dimly lit and smelled faintly of engine grease. The pilot was not aboard, which meant they would have to wait and hope he returned soon. Evan used the time to ask her one last question about what her mother had hidden. She reached into the folds of her worn clothes and pulled out a small pendant. It was made of a metal that shimmered faintly, even in low light. Its design was simple, yet carried an ancient elegance. She said it was a key not to a physical door, but to a vault of information hidden on a world long removed from the trade routes. This information, she claimed, could prove the corruption of the council and reveal how far their control truly reached. Evan stared at the pendant, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on him. They were no longer just running from capture, they were running toward a secret that could shake the galaxy. If what she carried was real, then the people chasing her would stop at nothing to prevent its discovery. The sound of footsteps on the platform made them both look toward the hatch. A shadow passed across the light, and the ship's systems hummed to life. As the pilot returned, the girl stepped forward and spoke a name in a quiet but certain voice. The pilot froze in the doorway, his eyes narrowing as he studied her face. Then without a word he stepped inside and sealed the hatch behind them. In the distance, the muffled echo of armored boots grew louder. Evan knew they had only moments before the search reached this bay. The pilot glanced between them and then to the controls, making his choice without asking further questions. The engines roared softly, and the ship began to lift from the platform, slipping away from the station. Just as the alarm began to sound, the cargo ship drifted clear of the station's outer ring before the pilot pushed the engines to full burn. The view through the forward glass shifted from the cold metal of the docking bays to the endless sweep of stars. The alarms from the station faded into the background, but Evan knew the silence would not last. Whoever had sent the search teams would already be tracking their vector. The pilot, a lean man with a weathered face, kept his eyes fixed on the controls, his hands moving with the steady precision of someone who had seen his share of dangerous flights. He did not ask for details, only told them to strap in because the trip ahead would not be smooth. The girl sat across from Evan, her gaze on the pendant. In her hands it caught the faint light of the control panels and shimmered like water beneath a moon. She told him the journey would take them through regions of space avoided by most ships, places where the old charts were incomplete, and where only those with the right coordinates could navigate without vanishing. The world they sought, she explained, was hidden deep in one such region, masked by a natural field of charged particles that scrambled sensors. Without the pendant and its coded signal, they would never find it. Evan listened while keeping an eye on the readings from the rear scanners. Within minutes, the display lit up with the signatures of two ships leaving the station at high speed. Both were smaller and faster than the freighter, which meant they would close the distance quickly. The pilot cursed under his breath and adjusted their course toward a wide belt of asteroids. He said it would be dangerous, but the rocks would give them cover from long-range targeting. The engines shifted in tone as the freighter dove toward the dark mass of tumbling stone and ice. The first impacts of smaller debris rang faintly against the hull, and the ship shuddered as the pilot threaded them through the moving maze. Evan gripped the edge of his seat, watching fragments of rock spin past the glass, close enough to scrape the paint. Behind them, the pursuing ships hesitated, then followed their drives. Burning bright in the darkness, the girl leaned forward, her voice calm, as she told the pilot which path to take, using patterns in the asteroid movement that seemed invisible to Evan. It was as if she could read the chaos and find a safe passage hidden within. They wove through the belt for what felt like hours before the scanner showed the pursuit falling behind, but the relief was brief, because a new reading appeared ahead. A blockade field had been activated across the outer edge of the belt, an energy net designed to stop anything that tried to pass. The pilot muttered that it had to be council forces. No one else had the reach or resources to place such a trap this far from the core worlds. Evan felt the air in the cabin grow heavy as the reality sank in. If they turned back, the pursuers would have them. In minutes, if they tried to push through the net, the ship could be torn apart. The girl stood and moved to the front, where she placed the pendant against the navigation console. The metal pulsed with light, and a thin beam projected from it, striking the forward glass like a point of light in the distance. The pilot's eyes widened as new coordinates appeared on his screen, coordinates that showed a narrow channel through the net, only wide enough for a careful pass. he adjusted their heading and eased the ship toward it. The moment they entered the channel, alarms filled the cabin, and the energy net flared around them. But the pendant signal seemed to push back the field just enough for them to slip through on the other side. The stars opened up again, vast and unbroken. The scanner showed no immediate pursuit, and the pilot finally let out a slow breath. He asked the girl what exactly she was carrying that could make the Council chase her to the edge of known space. She told him the pendant was the key to a vault her mother had hidden before disappearing. Inside the vault were records, proof of how the Council had manipulated entire systems for their own gain, toppling governments and installing leaders loyal only to them. These were not rumors or fragments of truth, but complete documented evidence enough to bring down the highest seats of power. Evan realized then why she had been running for so long, and why helping her meant placing himself directly in the path of the most powerful enemies in the galaxy. But the thought of turning back never crossed his mind, because in her eyes he could see the weight she carried and the hope that kept her moving. They traveled for another day without incident, following the new coordinates deeper into the uncharted region. The stars grew denser here, and the darkness between them seemed thicker, as if the light itself was reluctant to travel through it. Last, the pendant's projection shifted, showing a faint outline ahead. A planet half hidden behind the shimmer of the particle field slowly came into view. Its surface was a mix of deep green forests and pale silver oceans. The pilot guided the ship toward a narrow gap in the field, and they descended through a layer of bright haze. The landing was smooth in a wide clearing, surrounded by towering trees that swayed in the wind. The air outside was fresh and carried a faint metallic taste, as if charged with the same energy that hid the planet. From the galaxy, they disembarked and followed a worn stone path that led from the clearing into the forest. The girl walked with purpose, as if she had been here before, though she admitted she had only heard her mother describe the way. Her steps were steady until they reached a ridge where the trees parted to reveal a low structure built of smooth black stone. Its shape was simple, yet it seemed to hum faintly with power. The pendant began to glow brighter in her hand, and she stepped forward. Placing it into a small recess in the doorway, the ground trembled softly, and the stone parted to reveal a dark interior. A soft blue light filled the space within, showing rows of crystalline panels. Each panel held streams of shifting data symbols from dozens of languages and countless star systems. The girl stepped inside and touched one of the panels, which came alive with the image of her mother speaking directly into the recorder. She explained how she had discovered the Council's manipulation, and how the vault was the only safe place to store the truth until someone could bring it into the light. The message ended with a plea to protect the evidence and use it only when the moment was right. Evan stood in silence, taking in the vast weight of what lay before them. These records could change the course of the galaxy, but they could also paint a target on anyone who possessed them. The girl turned to him, her eyes steady, and asked if he was ready to help her bring this to the people. He looked at the panels, then at her, and knew his answer would bind him to a path from which there would be no turning back. Vault was silent, except for the faint hum of the crystal panels. Evan stood still, letting the reality sink in. Every fragment of data, every recorded message, every image stored here was a weapon of truth sharper than any blade. The girl moved among the panels with a focus that left no doubt. She knew exactly what she was looking for. She gathered the key files into a small, encrypted core, the pendant acting as the master access. Without it, the data could not be read or altered. Pilot, who had followed them into the vault, looked uneasy and kept glancing toward the doorway, as if expecting trouble to step in at any moment. Evan asked her how she planned to use this. She said there was only one way to make it matter. The files had to be sent to every free broadcast channel at once, before the Council could intercept them. If the truth reached billions of people across hundreds of systems at the same time, there would be no way to bury it again. But she also knew the moment they sent the signal, their location would be exposed, and the chase would begin again. Only this time, it would not stop until either She was gone, or the Council's rule was broken. They returned to the ship carrying the core and lifted off from the clearing. The co-touring pilot charted a course toward a relay station hidden on the far side of a small moon. Its transmitters were old, but still strong enough to carry a signal across the network. Evan kept scanning the skies, but for a while, the journey was quiet. Almost too quiet. When they reached the relay, the pilot brought the ship down onto the cracked landing pad. The structure was little more than a steel tower rising from bare rock, yet inside its system still hummed with life. The girl connected the core to the main console and began the upload. Progress bar on the screen crawled forward while Evan stood by the doorway watching the horizon. He saw them before. The alarms began, two sleek black ships cutting through the darkness, their drives burning with cold blue light. He called out, and the pilot cursed at starting the ship's engines again. The girl refused to stop the upload, saying they could not leave until it was complete. The first blast from the pursuing ship struck the ground near the relay, throwing up clouds of dust and rock. The air shook with the force of each impact. Evan ran to the gun controls and brought the ship's turrets online, firing at the attackers not to destroy them, but to keep them at a distance. The pilot lifted the freighter slightly from the pad to make them a harder target. The girl's voice came through the comm telling them the upload was almost done. Evan could see the enemy ships circling, trying to find a clean shot. He kept firing, forcing them to break their patterns and circle wider. The seconds dragged like hours until finally the girl shouted that the signal was away the moment the upload finished. She ripped the core from the console and ran for the ship. Evan covered her as the pilot swung the freighter fully into the air. One of the black ships broke formation and came in close, firing along their port side. The hull shuddered and alarms flared through the cabin. The pilot rolled hard to starboard and dove low, skimming the surface of the moon before angling up into open space. The pursuers followed, but now their movements felt sharper, more desperate, as if they understood what had just been unleashed. They chased them for hours through empty sectors, until at last a burst of coded messages began to flood every channel on the comm network, civilian voices, station relays, and independent news feeds, all repeating fragments of the files. The girl's mother speaking of the Council's corruption, documents naming the officials who had toppled governments, images of secret prisons on remote worlds. The truth was spreading faster than the black ships could follow. Evan saw the shift in the pursuers' movements, one of the ships peeling away, perhaps to return to report, while the other kept a half-hearted chase before vanishing into the black. When the danger finally passed, the pilot eased back on the engines, letting the freighter drift. Evan sat across from the girl, and for the first time since they had met, her shoulders relaxed. She told him the fight was far from over, that the Council would try to discredit the evidence and hunt those responsible, but now the truth was in too many hands to be erased. He asked her what she would do now, and she said she would go where she was needed to speak for those who could not speak for themselves, and to rebuild what the Council had broken. She told him she could not do it alone, and asked if he would stay at her side. Evan thought of the cargo bays, the endless routine, and the life he had before all this. He knew that if he returned, it would be safe, but it would also be empty compared to what lay ahead. If he returned, it would be safe, but it would also be empty compared to what lay ahead. Told her yes, and felt the weight of the words settle like a promise. The pilot gave a small nod, as if he had expected this answer from the start. Together they set a new course away from the core worlds and into the uncharted edges of space weeks. Later they arrived at a liberated capital world where crowds filled the streets and screens displayed the evidence they had released. People were demanding change, and in some places already tearing down the symbols of the old rule. The girl was welcomed not as a fugitive, but as the rightful heir to a legacy she had once been forced to hide. She refused titles and crowns, instead taking a position that allowed her to protect the new freedoms beginning to grow. Evan stood near her on a high balcony overlooking the city lights, watching as the night sky stretched far above. Stars were endless, and for the first time in years, he felt that his life was endless too, not in time, but in possibility. He had once thought she was nobody, just a quiet stranger in a cargo bay, but she had changed the fate of worlds, and in doing so had changed his fate as well. As the wind swept across the balcony, carrying the sound of voices and hope, he realized the galaxy was wide and full of shadows. But it was also full of light, and he intended to follow it wherever it led. The end.